Marley was dead. To begin with, Marley was as dead as a doornail. And in order for you to believe this fantastical story and to relate to it fully, you must fully believe, or else nothing is true.
Scrooge never painted out old Marley's name, though his old partner was definitely dead. The place was known as Scrooge and Marley. Sometimes people called Scrooge Scrooge and sometimes Marley, but he answered to both names. It was all the same to him. He did not mind. He did not care.
Scrooge was a selfish old sinner. He didn't thought 1 degree Christmas. One day was like any other. Minutes, hours, days, months merged monotonously into one another.
One dark Christmas Eve, old Scrooge sat busy in his counting house. It was biting, foggy weather. It draped invisibly, clinging on damp to every surface, muffling the sounds of winter. The festive season had no place or welcome in this abode.
Scrooge had a very small fire, each coal piece accounted for, efficient and ample. But his clerk's poor fire was barely warm, more smoke than warmth, adding a musty, burnt unction to the already stale surroundings. "Merry Christmas, Uncle!" Scrooge's nephew came bounding into the room.
Scrooge looked up, showing his displeasure at the interruption. "Bah!" retorted Scrooge gruffly. "Humbug! Christmas a humbug, Uncle," he said. "You don't mean that?"
Huh. If I could work my will, every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas in his lips should be boiled with his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart. It is but one day of pretty frivolity and serves no purpose but his own.
The nephew answered, undeterred by his uncle's venom. "Don't be angry, Uncle. Come for Christmas tomorrow. A pause to celebrate and be merry. Surely you deserve a break as much as the next man." "Bah humbug!" fired back Scrooge, as if his nephew had asked him to throw caution aside.
"Oh, Uncle, why we cannot be friends? I come to you with my hand full of friendship and family. My invitation stands, you know, and my place at the table is always open for you, the same as doors. Uncle, Merry Christmas!" "Oh, you better watch out." "Goodbye," said Scrooge, not even looking up.
His nephew even stopped to wish a Merry Christmas to the clerk.
"Merry Christmas to you and your family, and my compliments of the season."
"And to you, kind sir," replied the gentle clerk, rubbing his hands together to add some warmth to his cold, cramped fingers. Scrooge stood up indignantly. "My clerk," mocked Scrooge. 15 shillings a week and a wife and family, talking about a Merry Christmas. Humbug.
An awkward silence prevailed, and all that could have been heard in the momentary reaction was the Gothic grandfather clock ticking from side to side. Scrooge glowered at the clerk and the nephew, one to continue your toils, and the other to exit by whence you came in.
Scrooge's nephew tilted his hat to his uncle with a passive smile and a parting comment of, "I hope that we will see you." As he swept out into the late afternoon, 2 more people exchanged places and entered the offices. Formally, they bowed to Scrooge. The shorter and the plumper of the 2 gentlemen was the first to speak. "Mr. Scrooge or Mr. Marley?" the gentleman asked quizzically.
"Mr. Marley?" Scrooge replied with gritted teeth at this further interruption. "Died 7 years ago. This very night." "Mr. Scrooge," said the second gentleman, "a few of us are going to give the poor meat and drink and means of warmth. What would you like to give?"
"Nothing," said Scrooge. "They can go to the debtor's prison."
Why should I support their inability to support themselves? The Lord deals with the needy. You know what? Many would rather die than face the stain on their character of the debtor's prison.
If they would rather die, said Scrooge, they had better do it and decrease the surplus population. I have no desire to help the undesirables. Now, I have precious work to do. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Flustered and dejected, the two gentlemen left, glancing momentarily at the clerk, who, apologetically, raised an eyebrow to them.
Scrooge sniffed, eyeing the clerk disdainfully, then shuffled back to his desk to continue his work. The silence continued as the afternoon wore on and ebbed its way towards the end of the day. The clerk continued with his balancing of the books as the last of his fire extinguished itself. With a rising vapour of single smoke that drifted and hovered in the lonely air.
Meanwhile, the fog and darkness and biting cold thickened. A young girl stooped down at Scrooge's keyhole to sing a Christmas carol, but at the first sound of "God bless you, merry gentlemen, may nothing you dismay,"
Scrooge jumped up, thumped his table so loudly the singer fled in terror, leaving the keyhole to the fog. The clerk, well used to these outbursts, continued on as if nothing had happened, silently wishing he was at home.
At length, the hour for shutting up arrived. Scrooge nodded to the clerk, who instantly snuffed his candle out, put on his hat and buttoned up his now threadbare coat. He shuffled his papers and neatly closed the ledger. "You'll want all day tomorrow, I suppose," said Scrooge scornfully.
The clerk observed that it was only once a year, his eyes pleading silently like a hungry dog raging for scraps. Scrooge deliberated. The clerk stood like a prisoner waiting for his sentence. "A poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December," said Scrooge. "Be here all the earlier next morning."
Scrooge closed up shop, locked up his offices, pocketing the key, and made his way through the narrow streets. There were not many people out now. He watched as his clerk was subsumed by the night, and gave him not a second thought as he journeyed on his route, as he had done every day for as long as he could remember.
And so, he arrived at the entrance of his gloomy dwelling. The yard was dark, and the fog and the frost hung about the house. His breath puffed out white vapours that merged with the cold night air. He looked around as if he might have been followed, assured he was alone. He climbed the stone steps of his portico.
As he reached the hard wooden door and fumbled for his key, he noticed that the knocker on his door, which was usually very large and ordinary, suddenly morphed into a grotesque version of his partner. Marley's face glared back at him. Scrooge was somewhat startled at this trick of light.
Startled, Scrooge dropped his key. It dropped, but it made no sound, as if the moment muffled it. As he retrieved it, he rose up and got close to the resemblance of Marley's face. His eyes were wide open, judging him, staring coldly, and his skin was of greyish colour, which made it a horrible thing to witness.
Scrooge rubbed his face, and as he looked, it became a knocker again. He ran his bony hands over it, examining it carefully. He turned the key, pushed open the castle-like door, and eagerly examined the reverse. But there was nothing behind the door, so he said, "Pooh-pooh," and closed it with a bang.
He turned and double-locked himself in. For a moment he stood in the blackness of the hallway. He was alone. After a cautious examination of all the rooms, he walked through to the drawing room. He told himself that it was nothing as he warmed his hands by the fire.
He poured himself a generous glass of ruby port wine, sniffed it haughtily, and then took a generous glug, licking his lips as the sweet fortified wine revived his lips from the cold night outside. He felt tired and annoyed, as if someone had played a rick to dupe him.
He sighed as he settled down in a leather wing-back chair close to the fireplace, his gaunt features illuminated by the flicker of the meager flames. His eyelids felt heavy as the soporific crackle of the fire nudged him towards a fitful sleep.
Suddenly, as if startled from his thoughts, he awoke, became aware that he was not alone. As if someone or something else was watching him. The temperature inside seemed to drop rapidly, and the fumes dulled, and a light around him lessened.
He sniffed and drank greedily, in a dismissive slight to the ambient change to the room. He gazed into the fire that was now roaring and grabbed a poker to prod it. As he did so, sparks flashed out and danced around the hearth.
"Humbug," he said, almost muttering to himself. He still felt uneasy, and then he heard it, a low clonking noise from the cellar. It seemed as if some person were dragging a heavy chain. He stood up, his poke still in his hand. He grasped it defensively.
From the hall, he heard the cellar door fly open with a booming sound. And then he heard the sound of the chain on the stairs, and then straight towards his door. His heart began to pound, and it felt as though it was as loud as the chains.
"Humbug! Humbug!" screamed Scrooge. Fear began to grip him as the noise grew stronger and more resonant, and he awaited the entrance into the room of the phantom that was responsible for this intrusion. He waited, heart pounding, chains crashing together.
It was Marley. The chain that Marley pulled was long, and it was made of cash boxes, keys, padlocks and purses. His body was transparent so that Scrooge could see the buttons on the other side of his jacket. It was a sight that Scrooge felt hard to witness, and with a trembling voice he cried out,
"What do you want with me?" cried Scrooge. "Who are you? Why are you here?" He waved the poker menacingly in an attempt to fend off this evil spirit. At first, the ghostly form was silent, just the clink of the chain settling.
Do you forget me so soon? In life, I was your partner, Jacob Marley. Scrooge looked on aghast as this form now spoke, in the same death-like tones of his old partner.
"Humbug! I tell you, humbug!"
Scrooge covered his eyes quickly. His childlike response that if he couldn't see it, it wasn't there. If he had been in bed, he would have pulled up the covers.
Do you believe in me or not?
I do, said Scrooge. I must. But why do spirits walk the earth? And why do they come to me? It is required of every man, the ghost returned. that the spirit within him should walk abroad among his fellow men. And if that spirit does not go forth in life, then it is condemned to do so in death.
You were chained, said Scrooge, trembling. Tell me, why?
I wear the chain I forged in life.
I made it. Link by link, yard by yard. I wear it of my own free will. Scrooge stood there, trembling even more. Did you know, pursued the ghost, that not 7 Christmas Eves ago, your chain was as heavy as this one? You've made it longer since then.
But you were always a good man of business, Jacob, faltered Scrooge. Business, cried the ghost, wringing its hands again. Mankind was my business. Kindness was my business. I am here tonight to warn you, pursued the ghost. You will be visited by 3 spirits.
I think I'd rather not, said Scrooge. The spectre floated upon the bleak, dark night. Expect the first tomorrow, said the ghost, when the bell tolls 1. Expect the second the next night, at the same time. And the third upon the next night, at the last stroke of 12.
As soon as it had said these words, the spectre floated out upon the bleak, dark night. Moaning phantoms filled the air, each of them wearing chains like Marley's ghost. Doors rattled and floorboards creaked. His glass of port wine toppled over, spilling onto the dusty floorboards like a murder scene. Then, as if they were descending down a long, long staircase, they faded away. Scrooge closed the window. He examined the door through which the ghost had entered, and to his amazement, it was still double locked as he himself had done. He tried to say, "Humbug," but stopped. The words wouldn't come. Disturbed and somewhat annoyed, he went straight to bed and fell asleep upon the instant.